When the eagle learns to fly beside the phoenix, the sky opens wider. This moment, this victory, is more than a political maneuver or an unexpected turn of events. It is the rising of a nation that has long been watching, listening, learning. Indonesia did not need to shout to be seen. It did not need to intimidate to be respected. It simply walked with patience, stood with purpose, and waited for the world to catch up to what its people already knew, that their time was not coming. It had arrived. The world stage is often loud, filled with bluster and grand gestures. Powerful men speak as if they alone shape destiny. But history reminds us that it is not always the loudest voice that leads change. It is the most consistent one. Indonesia's ascent did not happen in one day or with one election. It was built over time in the quiet determination of its people, in the discipline of its military, in the faith of its farmers, teachers, and youth. Prabowo's move may have caught many off guard, but the deeper truth is that he is not the story the people are. The country is. To fool a man is not a great feat, but to fool a man who believes he cannot be fooled, that is the mark of quiet intelligence. To do it not for vanity, not for applause, but for the forward motion of a nation, that is power with purpose. Donald Trump, a man who has long believed in dominance, met a mirror he did not expect. One that reflected not aggression but grace, not manipulation but mastery. The kind of mastery that comes when a country knows who it is and is no longer willing to shrink itself for anyone else's comfort. Let the world pause and consider this shift. Let the cameras spin their stories, and the analysts write their columns. But beyond the headlines, something larger is unfolding. Indonesia has joined a chorus of nations writing a new song. A song not composed in Washington, London, or Brussels, but in Jakarta, Brasilia, Moscow, and beyond. A song carried by the winds of BRICS, gathering strength from the global south, rising on the wings of unity and shared vision. A phoenix in the east, meeting an eagle in the west, not in battle but in balance. This is not the fall of an empire, but the rise of a world no longer willing to orbit a single sun. Multipolarity is not a threat, it is a return to harmony. And Indonesia, with its long memory of colonization and resistance, with its spiritual depth and economic ambition, is stepping into its rightful place, not as a servant to giants, but as a giant in its own right. To those who cheer, know that this moment has been earned. To those who fear, know that this moment does not seek revenge, only respect. And to those who still doubt, who still cling to the belief that power can only look one way, come see the sky. Watch the eagle fly beside the phoenix. Watch the sky stretch wider than ever before. For it is no longer enough to dominate. The future belongs to those who know how to rise without trampling others, how to lead without silencing others, and how to win without losing themselves. Indonesia has done just that. And the world, whether it's ready or not, must now rise to meet it. Power bends to the spirit that refuses to kneel. In the quiet defiance of Indonesia's rise, there is a lesson for the world. A lesson written not in anger, but in resilience. Not in violence, but in vision. While powerful countries speak of rules and order, of systems they crafted to serve themselves, there are nations long overlooked, that have decided to stop asking for permission. Indonesia has not waged war. It has not marched troops across borders or silenced the voices of others. Instead, it has stood up with calm eyes and an unshakable will, and that is enough to make even the strongest powers tremble. The world is watching something it does not yet fully understand. A shift that is not loud but irreversible. For years, the dominant global order centered itself around wealth, weaponry, and Western ideals. It shaped alliances like tools and defined progress through the lens of profit. But now BRICS is no longer a whisper. It no longer exists in theory or potential. It is becoming a force, a storm of emerging voices and rooted identities, coming together not to destroy but to restore fairness, to restore balance, and most importantly, to restore dignity. Indonesia's role in this storm is not accidental. It is the result of decades of endurance, of choosing growth over aggression, education over submission, and unity over division. In a world where countries are often bullied into taking sides, Indonesia chose its own, a side rooted in sovereignty, in regional solidarity, in shared futures instead of dictated destinies. That choice was not without risk. To stand independent in the face of giants is to walk a road of pressure and persuasion. But power always bends, eventually to the ones who do not yield. The leaders of old power structures feel the ground shifting, and their discomfort grows louder with each new alliance. With each new voice joining the BRICS chorus, they scream about lost influence, about betrayal, about challenges to their supremacy. But what they truly fear is not a military threat. It is the rising awareness that their monopoly on leadership is fading. They fear that others are realizing they can write their own rules, set their own tables, and invite whom they please. And that realization, once it takes root, cannot be uprooted. Let us not mistake Indonesia's rise as a challenge to the world. It is, instead, a challenge to injustice, a refusal to sit quietly while decisions are made behind closed doors, a declaration that development is not a Western gift, but a human right. It is also a message to the global South that there is power in unity, power in history, and power in faith. Not religious faith alone, but faith in one's own worth, in the promise of one's people, in the future that no longer asks for validation from the West. As BRICS grows stronger, the winds of power blow in a new direction, and those winds do not seek to uproot the trees. They seek to clear the smog that has clouded our view of what leadership should be, not control but cooperation, not dominance but dignity. Indonesia is not just a part of this storm, it is helping steer it, and the world must now learn to listen. Because the spirit that refuses to kneel is not here to destroy. It is here to lift. Lift the overlooked, the silenced, the underestimated. Lift them into a place where power is no longer a shadow over the many, but a light that shines from every direction. That is the future Indonesia sees. That is the storm now gathering. And that is the force no empire can bend. A lion need not roar to be feared. It simply must walk with knowing. This is the quiet truth shaking the foundations of power in the West. The American people, long accustomed to seeing their country as the axis of the world, are awakening to a storm they did not expect. But this storm carries no bombs, no invasions, no armies. It carries something far more unsettling. Clarity. It is the recognition that others have learned the language of power and diplomacy, and now speak it with fluency and confidence. That others, like Indonesia, are no longer waiting to be invited. They are building their own tables, writing their own rules, and walking paths not paved by Washington or Wall Street. The cry from the American people is not one of hatred. It is one of realization. They scream because the reflection in the mirror has changed. Once it showed the world's uncontested leader, the architect of alliances, the protector of free markets. Now it shows a giant questioned, its grip loosening, its story no longer the only one told. When Prabowo moved in silence and outmaneuvered expectations, it was not just about one leader besting another. It was a signal to the world that the game had changed, and the pieces were moving in a new direction. What rattles the foundations of American exceptionalism is not that another nation rises, it is that others no longer fear to rise beside it. The lion in Indonesia does not roar. It does not need to. It walks with a memory of colonial wounds and national rebirth. It walks with knowledge forged in struggle and silence, in dignity and perseverance. And when such a lion walks into global halls of power with steady steps and clear eyes, it unsettles those who have long defined themselves by how loudly they could speak, or how far they could reach. For decades, the world was divided into those who decide and those who obey. Now that binary fractures. America, for all its innovation and influence, now faces the truth that it must share space, and not just in trade or treaties but in leadership. It must recognize that the world is not afraid of alternatives anymore. That BRICS is not a side note in economic papers. It is a movement, a shift in consciousness. A rebellion not through chaos but through creation. A refusal to remain in the back rows of global decision-making. As the American people scream, some out of fear, some out of awakening, there is opportunity. Because in every unraveling of illusion, there is a chance to build something honest. The question is not whether America will remain strong. It surely will. The question is whether it will learn to walk beside, rather than ahead of others. Whether it can respect the quiet strength of nations like Indonesia, and see not a threat but a partner, not a rival but a fellow sovereign power with its own rhythm, its own wisdom and its own right to rise. This is not a world ending. It is a world expanding. One where fear gives way to understanding, and dominance gives way to cooperation. One where the lion does not need to announce itself, because its presence is known, its legacy felt, and its future undeniable. The American people are right to scream, not in despair, but in transformation. They are witnessing the fall of a myth, and the rise of a truth, that no single voice defines the world. Many voices walking in purpose shape it together. And so the lion walks on, never roaring but always heard. Those once overlooked are now the ones lighting the fire. For generations the narrative of progress has been written by a few, and the rest of the world was expected to follow the script. But now, that story is being rewritten not in quiet corners, but on the global stage. BRICS, once seen as a loose collection of hopeful economies, is now forging itself into a symbol of resistance and renewal. It is no longer content to be invited into power. It is creating its own center of gravity. In this rising movement, Indonesia stands firm and luminous, not as a guest but as a host, not as a beneficiary but as a builder. The beauty of this moment lies not in confrontation, but in creation. A new world is taking shape, and it is being built by hands that once tilled the soil of survival. Hands that were once invisible to the halls of global policy, now hold the blueprint of the future. Those hands belong to farmers in Java, teachers in Surabaya, engineers in Jakarta, and dreamers scattered across every island in the Indonesian archipelago. These people, long spoken for, are now speaking with their own voices. Their fire is not made of rage. It is made of purpose. The West, so long the architect of global order, is now forced to reckon with the fact that order does not mean justice, and leadership does not mean domination. BRICS challenges that assumption not by toppling the old towers with force, but by outgrowing them. As countries like Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now Indonesia begin to move together with clarity, they are not begging for a seat. They are building an entirely new house, and this house is lit with a fire that was kindled in years of exclusion and kept burning by faith in a better way. Indonesia's rise is not a miracle, it is a consequence. A consequence of centuries of being underestimated, of being measured by metrics not made for it, of being held to standards not born from its soil. It is what happens when a nation refuses to internalize its limits, and instead invests in its people, its culture, and its sovereignty. This fire did not start overnight. It grew in silence, in classrooms and factories, in conversations between elders and youth, in the boldness of a country that dared to believe it deserved more. Now the fire spreads, not destructively, but purposefully. It spreads to other nations long labeled emerging, as though their power had not already arrived. It spreads through trade agreements made without the West's blessing. It spreads through currency swaps, through diplomatic visits, through cultural pride that refuses to be diluted. And in its glow a truth is revealed. The world is not turning upside down, it is finally turning right side up. This fire lights more than ambition, it lights memory. It reminds the global South of its worth. It tells nations that their history of struggle is not shameful, but sacred. That their wounds do not weaken them, they mark them as survivors. And in this unity there is not just power, but peace. A peace that is not handed down by superpowers, but cultivated by equals. A peace rooted in mutual respect and the end of unilateral domination. So as the torch is passed, not in ceremony but in reality, those once overlooked stand in the light of their own making. They no longer ask to be seen. They are too bright to be ignored. And as this fire continues to burn across continents, it is not the end of something old. It is the dawn of something just, something shared and something new. When one voice rises in justice, it echoes across all lands. The sound may begin softly, carried by a single breath, a single truth. But if it is rooted in what is right, it becomes a chorus the world cannot ignore. Indonesia's voice has risen, not to provoke, not to conquer, but to declare its rightful place in a world that no longer belongs to just one narrative. In choosing its path alongside BRICS, in refusing to be cornered into someone else's vision of progress, Indonesia has not declared war, it has declared awakening. This is not about a single man, not even a single nation. This is about the unfolding of a global consciousness that understands justice is not the domain of the powerful. It is the birthright of the present and the future. For too long the world was split into those who lead and those who follow, but now the rhythm has shifted. The voices of the global south are no longer asking for space. They are taking it, not with force but with focus, not through subversion but through sovereignty. The echo of Indonesia's decision will not be confined to Southeast Asia. It will ring in Africa, in Latin America, in the Middle East, and in every place where people have waited for their dignity to be recognized. America is listening, even if it resists the sound. The American people scream not out of hatred, but because something inside them is changing. They feel it in their economy, in their foreign policy, in the way other nations are beginning to speak back. The scream is not from arrogance, it's from confusion, from watching a world they thought they controlled begin to spin on a new axis. But in this confusion lies a great opportunity, the chance to learn, to unlearn, and to grow into something more cooperative, more honest and more humane. The rise of BRICS is not the collapse of one world. It is the creation of another. It offers not revenge but restoration. A balance, long denied, is finally being restored. Not by breaking but by building. And in the building we find the essence of this global shift. Indonesia did not rise by following orders. It rose by honoring its people, its history, its spirit. It rose by choosing peace where others demanded loyalty, by choosing collaboration where others offered control. That is the justice that now echoes across oceans. This echo is not loud because it wants to be feared. It is loud because it has been silent for too long. It carries the prayers of ancestors who once toiled under empires. It carries the dreams of children who want a world shaped not by threats but by trust. It carries the steady heartbeat of millions who finally understand that justice is not gifted, it is claimed, not with weapons but with wisdom, not with propaganda but with principle. And so the echo grows. As BRICS welcomes new voices, as new alliances are formed without permission from old powers, the world steps closer to equilibrium, to a time when leadership is not monopolized but shared, when no single currency, army, or government dictates the terms of humanity. Indonesia's voice, steady, intentional, and just, reminds us all that silence is not peace, and obedience is not justice. True justice comes when each nation, each people, each voice can rise freely without being silenced or shamed. That time has come, and those who cannot hear it yet soon will. Because when one voice rises in justice, the echo carries far. It moves through borders, through doubt, through fear, and it calls to others to rise too. Not in battle but in belonging. Not in defiance but in dignity. And once that echo is heard, it cannot be stopped. It becomes the song of a new world.